I'm going to show you how to make our absolute favorite waffles. And the cool thing is that you can make this batter with sourdough discard or without. Either way, they're delicious, and it's basically the same steps to make it. I'll show you how. But here's one of the reasons why I love this waffle batter is because you can get it ready ahead of time. It can sit in your fridge for a couple of days so that you could have fresh waffles any morning of the weekend without having to make the mess and all of the rigmarole of mixing it up. So let's go make some waffles. To start, you want to get 3 bowls out, or 3 containers. I know it seems so silly, and I used to think, this is ridiculous. Why do you need 3 bowls? But honestly, your waffles will turn out best if you have the 3 bowl system. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to get all of the dry ingredients together, and I put the dry ingredients in the biggest bowl. For the dry ingredients, we're mixing up flour, sugar, baking powder, and salt. And read the recipe in the description below or on the blog for the amount you need, because it's different if you're using sourdough discard or you're doing the original recipe. Once you have all of those ingredients into the biggest bowl, use a fork or your whisk and whisk it together so that all of those things get mixed together really well. I'm putting all of the ingredients, the whole recipe is down in the description below, and I'm also putting a link to our blog. If you go to the blog, you can actually print out the recipe, and you can actually watch this video from the blog as well, but I don't know if you're like me, I like to have the recipe where I can just see it, so I know exactly what I'm doing next. So feel free to click on over to the blog, print that recipe out. The great thing about this recipe is that you can double it or triple it, quadruple it. I've done all of the different amounts of it, and it still comes out so great. And especially if you're gonna have a big group at your house, it's so awesome to have this waffle batter all mixed up and ready to go in your fridge. It will stay in your fridge just fine for a couple days. I have noticed sometimes, depending on probably the weather, that sometimes the top will get just a little bit oxidized where it starts to turn a little bit gray. It hasn't affected the waffles in the least bit, doesn't change the flavor. So just know you can make this ahead of time and save it in your fridge, and feel free to double, triple, quadruple it. But here we are, we're still working on our dry ingredients. Get them all mixed together and then set that bowl aside. Now let's work on the wet or the liquid ingredients. And I love to use the clear glass 1 quart measuring cup. Because then you can actually see how much you're pouring in. I just melt the butter right in it. It's one less thing that you have to wash. And then I add in the half and half, and don't scrimp. I know it's easy to be tempted to put milk in, but I'm going to tell you, your waffles will be, they're just going to be better if you use half and half. I have even during the holidays made these with eggnog, and they are so delicious. Then add in 1 teaspoon of your vanilla. And then this is the part. If you are wanting to use sourdough discard, this is when you would add the sourdough discard, and you're going to do half a cup, and it goes into the wet ingredients. Now on the blog, it has both of the different recipes. One for if you're using sourdough discard, and then the other for the original waffle recipe. If you're doing the original waffle recipe, you're doing slightly more flour and half and half. If you are going to do the sourdough discard version, then make sure that you use the adjusted recipe, because you do need to use less half and half and flour when you're using the discard. And just remember, your discard can either come straight from your fridge jar where it's just been waiting to be activated to be baked with, or it can come, like let's say you made a big batch of Fed starter, it turned into leaven, and you had too much, you didn't need it for the recipe you were gonna make for bread. You can use either of those for your waffles. Now, here is the secret to these waffles. I know this is an extra step, but do it. Separate the eggs. This is where your third bowl comes into play. You're gonna put your egg whites into that bowl, and then the egg yolk goes in with the wet ingredients. Now here are a couple things that I've learned throughout the years that are essential when you are trying to whip your egg whites. You want to make sure that there is no yolk in with your egg whites. So be really careful as you're separating them. I like to use my hands. People have all sorts of different methods. Also, make sure that your bowl is very clean. There's no oil in your bowl. I don't know why, but one time years ago, I think some butter had gotten into the bowl and I thought it wouldn't be a big deal. It is a big deal. The egg whites would not whisk up. So I really love this electric hand mixer. I'm going to put the link to it below. It is so amazing at whipping egg whites, or if you were going to do your own homemade heavy whipping cream. It does it so fast. But here's the thing, you want to whip these eggs until they are very, very stiff. Keep going on it. And I cut some of this out. That wasn't real time. It took probably 1 minute to get them really stiff. Then, now all 3 of these bowls, we're going to bring all of the ingredients together. Get the dry bowl all whisked up and ready, and then put your wet ingredients in there. I know that the butter kind of got a little bit chunky because the half and half was cold. That's okay, but you just want to make sure that your butter is melted when you put it in with that half and half. You don't want to have chunks of butter in the waffles because as they go into the waffle maker, it will make them get holes in it. So make sure your butter is very, very soft and melted. Whisk the wet ingredients with the dry ingredients, and I just beat it until I get it to be pretty smooth. This is really similar though to when you make pancakes, or even if you used waffle batter, they always tend to have a few lumps in it. That's okay, but give it a really, really good whisk before you gently fold in those egg whites. We don't want to whisk the egg whites into the batter because we would be pushing all of the air and goodness out of those egg whites. So once your batter is fully whisked together, then we are going to fold the egg whites in, and look at how stiff they are. Egg whites are miraculous. I can't even believe they can do this. And I would love to be able to chat with the person that figured this out, because they didn't have an electric hand mixer, and somehow they figured out that they could do this with egg whites. Always amazes me, and I'm very grateful for that person. So here's what you're gonna do. Just fold your egg whites in. Now, here is a cool thing about using sourdough discard in this recipe is it gives the waffles just a little bit of a tang in their flavor. They're really creamy and delicious. Even if you don't use the discard, don't worry. You're still gonna have the most amazing waffles. But I have noticed that if the discard is in the waffle batter, it actually makes them just slightly fluffier as the batter sits in the fridge overnight. I like to fold the egg whites in until there are no big chunks of them anymore. And even though, yes, I realize, okay, it's pushing some of the air out by doing that, you don't want to have a big chunk of egg white in there, because then when you go to make your waffles, you're going to have these pieces of the waffle that is more like egg white than waffle batter. So even though we weren't using the whisk, do make sure that you get them very well incorporated. Then I just cover the bowl with plastic wrap, pop it into the fridge, and it's ready for us to make waffles anytime that we want. There it is, waiting for us to have breakfast. And I don't know if you saw, but next to it was the homemade blueberry syrup that we made. Stick around to the end of the video. I'll show you how to make that as well. But this is my routine when we are gonna have a waffle morning. I get all of the elements out. Waffle maker, the batter, I get the syrup warmed up, butter. I always put a cooling rack next to the waffle maker, because I'll show you when we get to that point, but there's a trick to keeping your waffles crunchy. And I just have it all ready to go so people can make waffles as they wake up. Especially if it is a morning that we're all just kind of moving at our own pace. It's so nice to just have a fresh waffle. They don't get gummy or chewy. You get to just eat it warm right out of the waffle iron. So this is why it's so lovely to make big batches of the batter because you could have fresh waffles a couple mornings in a row. You could even freeze the batter if you want. And sometimes when our kids were younger, I used to make big batches of the waffles. I would just make all of them, and then I would actually freeze the waffles so that they could just pop a waffle in the toaster oven whenever they wanted one. But I actually think they taste better if you can just make them fresh when that's possible. But here's the setup. Waffle maker, I have some fresh berries if anybody wants to add berries into their waffle. Let's see, we have our cooling rack, fork. You need to have a fork so that you can get the waffle out of the waffle maker. We have our blueberry syrup, our regular maple syrup, butter, all the goodness ready to go. Here is what the waffle batter looks like the next morning. Look at those bubbles. That means the waffles are gonna be fluffy and so delicious. When I make them in our waffle maker, which I'm gonna put the link to this down below, I did a lot of searching because I wanted a waffle maker that I could make 4 individual square waffles. And I wanted one that wasn't gonna take up a huge amount of space in our pantry. And the Cuisinart is the winner. But this is how I put fresh berries in the waffles. I just add them to that specific waffle and then I top with just a little bit more batter. Not everybody wants berries in their waffles, so I don't put them into the batter. Just add them into the waffles that you want. So if you wanted to add chocolate chips, you could do the same thing. But here's why I love this waffle maker, because I can make 1 or 2 waffles at a time, and you don't have to make this big, huge, massive one. It only takes a couple minutes, and you can decide how toasty you want yours. But I use the fork, pop the waffle out. They're still pretty soft when you first take them out, but if you let it rest on the cooling rack for just like 20 or 30 seconds, they get crispy. And that's my secret to getting them crispy. You don't want them to get super dried out and hard in your waffle maker. So take them out, set them on the cooling rack for just a second, and then top them with your butter. And then I usually have like a damp cloth that I can wipe the waffle maker out when we do the fresh berries or chocolate chips or something like that, because the berries or the chocolate will ooze out of your waffle, which is yum, so delicious, but you don't want that to stay on your waffle maker because it will end up burning to the next waffle. So just give it a wipe off if you put any of those fresh things in. And as you probably noticed, you don't need to butter or spray oil or anything the waffle maker. It's non-stick and your waffle batter has plenty of butter in it. Don't do any extra butter or oil on your waffle maker. I am topping these waffles with, yes, a little bit of butter. You gotta have a little butter on there. And then I'm gonna put the homemade blueberry syrup that we just made. We went and picked berries at my sister's blueberry patch. And so now we're just making everything with blueberries. So blueberry waffles, blueberry syrup. But like I said, stick around. I'll show you how to make the blueberry syrup. The cool thing about it is that you could use this same recipe for any fresh fruit that you have. It is so delicious. Everyone's been putting it on their yogurt and their oatmeal. And one of the kids even just sliced a banana and put the syrup on it. Enjoy all of the waffle goodness. Top it with whipped cream. Make it ahead of time so that you, your friends, family can have the best brunch with none of the mess. But most of all, we just hope that it helps you fill your table, not with just delicious food, but with great memories. We used to do Waffle Wednesdays when the kids were little, and now waffles have become a staple whenever friends come over, and I love having a big batch mixed up for everybody. But you want to make some blueberry syrup now? Okay, let's make it. The great thing about blueberry syrup, or really any fruit syrup that you make, is that you can keep it in your fridge for probably a month, but you could make a huge batch of it and freeze it, because I don't know if you're like me, but we end up with tons of fresh berries in the summertime, and I don't want them to all just go to waste. So sometimes I'll just make a really big batch and we pop some in the freezer. This recipe is below so that you can see exactly what I'm putting in here, but it was 1 cup of water, 2 cups of fresh berries, and half a cup of raw sugar. You could use less sugar if you think that your berries are sweeter or you just don't want it quite as sweet. You can adjust that. It will still set up just fine, because Once you get everything mixed into the pot, the sugar, water, berries, you're gonna make a little paste with cornstarch and water. And what I do is 1 tablespoon of cornstarch to 2 tablespoons of water, mix it up in a little bowl while the berries are simmering on the stove, and then it's ready when we're ready to add it in. But this is the trick to working with cornstarch. You want to make sure that it is all mixed up in this bowl before you ever add it into your syrup. If it is not really like pasty mixed up, you're gonna end up with cornstarch clumps in your syrup, and you will be so frustrated because honestly, you cannot get them out. I've tried, I've done it before on accident, and so frustrating. So once you get the pot of goodness mixed up, your berries, water, and sugar, get your cornstarch mixed up in its own little bowl so that it can just wait for its turn. Now let's simmer these berries. And the goal is to get it so that it is just on a gentle simmer, very gentle boil. You don't need it to be boiling really hard. What we're trying to do is cook the berries down. We are getting some of that moisture to simmer off as well, and it will begin to thicken up slightly on its own, but this takes about 15 minutes. And this is what I like it to sit at, where there's just a little bit of bubbles bubbling up consistently, and that's where you want to keep it for about 15 minutes. You don't need to stand at the stove stirring it constantly, but I do like to give it a stir every once in a while. So I'll pop over, look at it, make sure that it's still simmering, give it a stir. But this is what it's going to do for about 15 minutes. And then we are going to add our cornstarch. Mix it up again though to make sure it didn't settle, and then start to drizzle it in, mix it up again, drizzle, drizzle, mix it up. And then what we're going to do is we're going to bring it back up to a simmer. And at this point, you want to stand there and stir it consistently while you simmer it for just a minute. What that's doing is it's activating your cornstarch so that it will thicken your syrup. Now, we like our syrup to be a little bit chunky, so I don't blend it, but once you get it thickened, if you don't want to have any pieces of fruit in yours, you want it to just be thick, no chunks of blueberry or skin, you could definitely use an immersion blender or stick it in your blender, and you could blend it to give it a smooth consistency. But just make sure that you simmer it for a minute with the cornstarch in there so that you can make sure that that cornstarch activates and thickens it. It's not going to make it really thick like jam or jelly, but it is going to give it more of that syrup consistency. If you skip over the cornstarch, your syrup will be very, very watery. So while I'm going, I just am pushing those berries up against the side just to make sure that they've all released all of their goodness. There's not like one big blob of a berry in there. You can do the same if you had strawberries or you were doing raspberries. Oh, and here is my little secret, is I do a couple cracks of salt. I think it needs just that hint of salt to give it a little bit more flavor. Then I want you to taste it because this is an optional thing, but we like to put a little bit of vanilla in ours. It doesn't make it sweeter, but it just gives it a little bit more richness to the flavor. But I always taste it. Berries taste different. Give yours a taste. Maybe you taste it at that point and you think, I really like it. I love the way it tastes. I decided for this mix, we wanted to add vanilla. So I put that in, stir it up, and now it is all ready to go. I let it cool for just a bit on the stove so that it's not still boiling hot. But then I end up adding it into a jar because we're gonna just keep this in our fridge. But this is the point that if you wanted to, you could freeze it. Or if you like canning, you could even can this. And if I was canning it, I would do a 20-minute water bath. If you know how to can, you'll know what that means. But this funnel is a canning funnel, and it fits so perfectly in the mason jars, and it makes it so that you can pour the syrup or whatever you're making into the jars without making a massive mess. I'm going to make sure all of these links are down below so that you can easily find all of the tools that we're using in this video. But that's how you make your own fruit syrup, top your waffles with it, or whatever you dream up. But we're so glad that we could be in the kitchen with you. Welcome to life at Ciderpress Lane. We love sharing all the goodness with you from our kitchen and table, from our garden, from freedom dinners and family dinners. We're just so glad that you're here. Cheers to enjoying the goodness of life together.